Hello, good afternoon to all. Welcome this webinar Doctrina 15. Myself, Dr. Shefi AE, Assistant Professor and Head of the Department of History, Syed College, Taliparamba. This is the 15th seminar in this series. Here we are assembled here to all over India and other part of the world to participate the great event. In this session, we are going to discuss about one of the relevant topic on multiculturalism and interfaith literacy, challenging the idea of clash civilizations. I hope this webinar is help us to understand the relation between literature and culture. Within this limited period of time, I am not going to the detail of that particular area. My duty is to welcome our resource persons. Now, today we have two eminent resource persons. One of them, Dr. Abdel Laitif Chalikandi, the eminent scholar, writer, and a cultural advisor, Tawasul Center for Publishing, Research and Dialogue, Rome. He has authored a number of books related with Islamic philosophy, literature and culture. On behalf of this Syed College and the Department of History, I welcome you, sir. And one more resource person in this seminar, Dr. Sabrina Lei, is an Italian intellectual and writer advocating productive dialogue between Islam and the West. She is an emerging voice in the West to build a new discourse rooted in the humanistic principles of Islam. On behalf of this organizing committee and Syed College, I welcome you, madam. And I also welcome our beloved principal, Lieutenant Dr. Muhammad Ashraf Varapalli, and Dr. Nafisa Baby, IQAC Coordinator, Dr. Abdul Salam AK, Coordinator, Doctrina 2020, and our Department Coordinator, Mr. Haider Ali, Assistant Professor, Department of History. And moreover, I welcome all the participants were a different part of the world and India, and thank you very much.
Political situation and creating as much as possible a type of objective knowledge without judging any cultures or any religions in the interest of building interfaith harmony, challenging the stereotypical projections of all cultures. In short, building people, giving people a space to come together. So we work with a large number of universities in Rome and abroad. We also work with some of the most important institutions in Italy and abroad. We work with Vatican's Interfaith Department. Basically, we are trying to create or contribute a humanistic, inclusive understanding of all cultures and religions, away from all kinds of dogmatism, all kinds of narrow-minded to religion. We have done enormous work. I'll just give you quickly. This is the translation of Bhagavad Gita in Italian done by Sabrina Lei, Dr. Sabrina Lei. Some of you might have read about it in the recent newspaper interview. This is one of the translation we did as part of Building Bridges in Italian. Then we have done another translation. This is an important work in 20th century, a very inclusive Quran translation of Abdullah Yusuf Ali. This Sabrina Lei translated in Italian in 2 volumes. This is one of the work we have done. And then this is again, we recently republished Abdullah Yusuf Ali's classic Quran translation in Italian, English edition itself. Then since most of you are from Kerala, you might be knowing Mr. Innocent. He has got this book that talks about his, how he cured from his cancer ward lechiri. Sabrina has translated. So we are doing different translations, religious, cultural, and we have also translated the work of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and planning more translations. So through this cultural, interfaith, philosophical interaction, we are trying to create a very inclusive approach to relations across cultures and religion. So this is again Many of you know about Muhammad Iqbal, the great philosopher. One of his books we translated in Italian, Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. Then this is a work of Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Tufatul Muwahhideen, a very good work looking at the monotheism in all religions. Sabrina translated. So we also work with the university. I don't want to talk much about our work. This is just to give you the context. That is precisely because we chose this topic for today's program. That is multiculturalism and interfaith literacy, challenging the idea of clash of civilizations. I know there are two approaches. First approach is to give PowerPoint presentation and kind of spoon feeding. And instead of that, what I'm going to give you is just bits and pieces, certain points. And in a week, 10 days time, I'll be sending the whole lecture notes, perhaps Sabrina too, so you can use it. Because today I'm going to give just certain points by points, around 7 or 8 points. We will discuss it. I'm going to talk about the clash of civilization theory. And then I'm also going to look at, since the history department is organizing this conference, I'm also going to look at the writing of how British rewrote Indian history, how that British Raj writing of history is still creating problems in our contemporary communal relations in India. So this is the briefly about it. Now, many of you must have heard about the clash of civilization theory. As you know, since the Second World War until 1990s, there was this Cold War. Two superpowers, Soviet Union and United States, confronting each other in all parts of the world. It was a bipolar world then. There is the Eastern European, Soviet Union, communist group and the capitalist group. But by 1920s, the Cold War ended and capitalists, looked at it as a triumph of capitalism. Finally, we vanquished communism. Now we can rule the world. But as that triumphalism ended, many thinkers, many philosophers were looking at a more inclusive. Now that you don't have the communist bloc, you will be more inclusive. But strangely, that did not happen. At the same time, they started another theory. During the time of Cold War, the clash was between two civilizations. It was nationalized class, universal clash. But what happened following that, the idea of clash of civilization theory was propounded, mainly United States, by somebody called Samuel Huntington. Samuel Huntington wrote an article in Foreign Affairs, a very important journal in the United States in the 90s, and then called The Clash of Civilizations. It was an article very much discussed in the early 90s. Then few years later, he made a book out of this article. The main thesis of the article is that now that you don't have, communist, capitalist, between religions and cultures and civilizations. It's an interesting thesis. But when we look at that thesis, when we examine that thesis, we can see many, unproved assumptions. Because as we know, sometimes we define our identity in opposition to other identity. For example, if you are a Muslim, or if you are a Hindu, if you are a Christian, if you are a secularist, instead of defining your identity positively, constructively, you might define your identity in opposition to other identities to safeguard, to strengthen your identity. This is what Western capitalism did during the 40 or 50 years of Cold War. But now you need more enemy. Then they looked at here and there, reformed, centuries long Orientalist discourse and repackaged it and brought this idea of clash of civilization. According to that, he saw many civilizations. Western civilization is, of course, the criteria with which he looked at other things. There is Western civilization, Indic civilization, Scenic civilization, Confucian, Japanese, and Islamic and Latin American civilization. So he comes with the thesis that we're going to have a clash between Islamic civilization and the Western civilization. So this theory is again a very exclusive theory without considering the deep interaction between different worlds. When we look at history, I'm sure many of you are historians, professional historians, we can see that at one level, one can argue in a narrow sense that our Western civilization is the pure civilization, or South Asian civilization is the pure civilization. Like in the past, during the Greek times, the Greeks, ancient Greeks, divided world into two. We, the Greek, civilized, and those people who live in Africa and other parts of the barbarians, which we call Manichaean, in opposition, means the discourse of us versus against us versus them. This is the philosophy. This has got its own root, its own consolidations, and all these things. So when he propounded this theory, many people questioned it, because when we look at the West today, Western Renaissance, Western, philosophical Renaissance, religious Renaissance, all happened, historically speaking, with a deep interaction with the West, Islamic civilization in Spain, in Andalusia, in Baghdad. So there was a time when West forgot its root. So this is the case with now when we look at Indian history today. Indian history is an amalgam of so many civilizations, not just one civilization. Buddhist civilization, Hindu civilization, Islamic civilization, and all people from north to the south, all these civilizations, people jointly contributed to what we call it today's pluralistic India, because we have been living together, taking and giving from each other. For example, take modern West. Today we cannot think of West without thinking of people from the East coming, following the Second World War, coming and rebuilding the country. Peoples, they work together. But what happens that when we don't want to see this, when we want just to look and shrink into our identity, we create a very exclusive identity. This is what's happening. This kinds of exclusion, this kinds of marginalization. This was the theory that propounded by Samuel Huntington. There was another scholar from whom Samuel Huntington got this idea, was Bernard Lewis, who wrote this. He was a scholar, died at the age of 104 2 years ago. Throughout the 70 years of his career, he also created, wrote mainly polemical books. But his views were very much heard in the West, especially during the Bush administration. So beyond that, then there were scholars. I'm sure some of you might have heard about Edward Said. Edward Said is a couple of important books. First, he had this book, 1978, Orientalism, and then 1994 and 1978, Orientalism came, a very important book, how the West looked at the East in a very innovative way. Then another book covering Islam, then another book, Cultural Imperialism. All these books and so many other scholars, we get inspiration from these kinds of scholars. Many of us propose this theory that civilizations are inclusive. Our human experience is not the story of just West or East. Our human experience is not just the story of Iliad or Odyssey. Our human experiences are the story of Mahabharata, Ramayana, Gita. Our human experiences are the story of the Quran. Our human experiences are the story of Muslims, Hindus, all of us together, Buddhists, all of us together. It is this discourse is that what we are trying to, put before the world as a way of constructively engaging each other. Here comes the concept of cultural literacy and interfaith literacy. Today, as we speak, we can see what's happening in the United States and why such kind of inclusive understanding is very much important today. Of course, no one can condone the violence happening there, but why such things are happening? In 21st century world, we are all together like a globalized village. See, I'm here in Rome. Some of you are sitting in different parts of India, some of you from abroad, and we are all able to have this conversation. However, ironically, paradoxically, we are also separated. First of all, the social media. Social media is a double-edged weapon. So it can make us united. It can also bring disunity through many things. So this is what's happening, that when you exclude people. So when we talk about cultural literacy, what is the meaning of cultural literacy? What is the meaning of interfaith literacy? Now, in many places, when we see interfaith dialogue, we get this wrong notion that a Muslim quoting few verses from Christian or a Hindu scripture and trying to prove that Islam is great, or vice versa. That kind of polemical interfaith dialogue is not a solution. What we need, that we must have honesty, tolerance to accept other people and to see them, that subjectively my religion is true for me, but at the same time I should have the open-mindedness to accept other people. Then let us all talk together as friends, like in ancient Indian teaching, Vasudeva Kudumbakam. This is what Prophet also said, that there is no superiority of black over white, white over black. All human beings are children of Adam. This humanistic idea is what reflects the interfaith literacy, knowing about other religion, other cultures, other philosophy, visiting their temples or the mosque, participating in them, then trying to create this common bond. So here we have two things. There is religious fundamentalism, which is exclusive, which is bigoted, which is anti-human. And there is also radical secularism, which sees all manifestations of religion as a form of backwardness. They totally dismiss religion as a civilizational force. When we look at the world, of course, we had religious conflicts in the Middle Ages. Today, in many parts of the world, religion is causing conflicts, but at the same time, there is a greater picture. All this humanity, all the philosophers, all the thinkers, they contributed constructively to the human understanding. They were all religious people. So instead of stereotyping religion through radical secularism, and instead of having a very ideologically rooted religious fundamentalism, we must try to strive for a religious humanism. Religious humanism or religious literacy, rooted in religious literacy, when you have religious literacy of other religions, you will understand, you will come to a point, something called religious humanism. Religious humanism is like this. It gives importance. It understands the positive aspect of religion in the society. It accepts other people's faith. But at the same time, it also tries to achieve a very inclusive understanding of one's faith. And it also opens the door for other cultures. It does not think that people don't have the right choices. People have the right to make choices in terms of their religious faith. So this is what religious humanism, first religious literacy, religious humanism. So all these concepts, then multiculturalism. For example, when we talk about India, we can read India in a very, in a one point of view, say that India belongs to one group of people. And we can read in a different way. We can read in a multicultural way, as India is, as Kerala society is, as the West is, where all religious people, all religious cultures, all of them contributing towards what is India now, this unity in diversity. So this is idea of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism does not believe that all cultures are the same. Multiculturalism respect other cultural choices. So these are the points that I would like to make. So there is a concept of uh, political knowledge and civil knowledge. This is a concept that people like Edward Said discussed. And there is also a concept like power, how power creates new discourse. For example, when we study physics or chemistry or mathematics, there is no politics in it. But when we study sociology, when we study modern history, when we study literature, there is a very much chance that there is something called end up in a political knowledge. You can go and study like the Orientalists did. They went and studied West, East. They went and studied India. They went and studied Arab world. Then they created what is called Orientalism, that dividing people into East and West and appropriating the West, East for the West, and making, for example, things which is not there, things which is truth here becomes the great casualty. I'm sure you have heard about something called post-truth. Post-truth is a concept, a reflection of a political knowledge. What is truth? In reality, in objectively, it doesn't have much role. But what I make of truth, for example, the best example today is the media. When in media, you talk about this or that religion, for example, take any term, India. When people in the West talk about India, we know as India is a vast country with more than 500 years, 5,000 years of old civilization, starting from Mohenjo-daro and Harappa to the Vedic India. Then comes later medieval India, then modern India. India is a vast reflection of human civilization. But when someone from the West writes, what he does in generally is that he or she approaches from his own point of view, try to interpret it and try to create it an India or an Islam or an Arab world which is not there. This is quite interesting, during this COVID times, how media outlets in various parts of the world reported the COVID news, how they construct it. Here, what happens that truth becomes metaphor. Like Nietzsche said that, truth is what, truths are lies, what they have been forgotten that they were lies. You, using your power, using your discourse, using all sorts of intellectual philosophical tools, you create a story which is not there, and then it becomes a reality. And this is one of the things which I talked about, the social media. You can see a story is created, immediately it had an effect, but later only we realized that it was not true. So modern tools, modern cultural discourse, modern way of understanding the truth, all these things we must challenge as public intellectuals, using human tools, using cultural tools, and seeing the world as one humanity. So now let me come back to this idea of what happened. One of the most interesting thing about India, when we come to the idea of multicultural, is how Indian history has been projected and reprojected. we know that in 1757, the War of Plassey laid the foundation of British Empire in India. And when we study the British Empire, many of us, whether it is British Empire or Indian history, we study the political manifestation. But when we look closer, we know that political power is actually secondary. What happens is that the political power is based on a cultural power, a power to narrate the stories, that power to tell that this is what this country is like this. So there is a cultural, philosophical, intellectual appropriation of a people. It happened. It is based on this that British Empire was founded in India. So this is exactly what Edward Said said in his Orientalism, how the power to narrate one story and power to block other narrations coming. So it is based on this intellectual power that British Empire was built, and the political power, military power, was the secondary actually. So we must realize this very important fact. Today, when CNN or Fox News or any other news report a story about a country, there is an invasion coming. So you will see that behind that huge amount of stereotyping going on, you present them, you interpret them, and you create an India it is not there. This is what happened during the time of British history. So many of the things happening, communal tension, bigotry, we must look at British India. Of course, 1947 ended the colonialism, but still I think the British way of writing history is very much influencing our modern communal religious understanding in India. So for example, this idea of dividing India into Hindu India, Muslim India, and the British India, this was not there before British started rewriting the history. When we look at what they call Hindu India, it was actually Buddhist. There was the rule of Buddhists there for several hundred years, following Ashoka's conversion, Harsha, and all these kings. That time, Hindus and Buddhists, they coexisted. Many of the ancient kings, they had Hindus and Buddhists in a living together, talking together, discussing together. And then what they call Muslim India, actually starting from the Delhi Sultanate until the end of 1857, when Mughal Empire was sacked. During this time, also Indians never thought of India as a Muslim India, because maybe rulers were Muslims, but most of the bureaucracy, even most of the generals, most of the tax collectors, they all came from majority of the civilization. So these are, but what happened? British came to India. They came from Europe with the idea of religious war. For them, they had Protestant Catholic war. So they applied the same thing. Then at the same time, they needed actually to divide and rule. So they wanted to project Muslims and Hindus as adversaries. So they are the mediators. So the divide and rule. So we must really look at what happened, this British rewriting. I just want to give you very briefly two things, then conclude it. Last month, May, we know that something very important in the Indian history happened. That was the first war of independence. 1857, May 10th was a historical day as far as Indian history is concerned. That after more than 100 years of oppression, Indians, Hindus, Muslims, and all together led this great uprising called First World War of Independence. But even now, we take it as a Sipahi mutiny or revolt. And why it happened? Because history was written by the British. They were the one who actually presided over it, won the war, and saw the history, rewrote the history as an isolated revolt of sepoys. But it was not so. Of course, initially, when War of Independence started in Kanpur and Lucknow, they were soldiers, but in large parts of civilians joined it. What happened to that history? And more interestingly, Muslims and Hindus worked together, and they marched to Delhi and they declared a Muslim king as an empire of India, as the emperor of India. So you could see communal unity there. Indians, they were looking them not themselves as Muslims or Hindus, they were looking themselves as Indians. But what happened to the story of that history? And even now, after independence, we don't celebrate that. We are not aware of it, those great heroes, because history was written mainly by the victor, those people who were victorious. Jawaharlal Nehru, in his Discovery of India, talks 80 years after the War of Independence, the lack of materials about the first War of Independence, and says that, we don't know what happened, because 80 years of historical writing projecting Muslims and Hindus as adversaries, that still influence us. And British people, they wrote that history and they projected it. Even we now look at this great War of Independence, we don't celebrate it. We look at it as a Sepoy rebellion, as a mutiny. It was not actually a mutiny. My point is that the power to discourse, when you have power relations, higher power and lower power, what happens is that, like in the media today, if you have got the power to narrate the story, you are able to demonize, you are able to stereotype, create a discourse. As Nietzsche said, then what happens, lies become the truth, or like post-truth, like fake news. So as public intellectuals, we must have the tools, we must have a humanistic tools to approach these questions from the story of human point of view. What happened in 1857? What happened in Indian history? We know all the story of Raja Ram Mohan Rai. You cannot even imagine now someone like Raja Ram Mohan Rai learned Arabic language. He wrote one of his first book in Persian and Arabic. The very name Rai was given by the Mughal Empire, the Nawab of the Mughal who were ruling Bengal. Raja Raman Rai went to England representing the Mughal king. That was the unity existed in India during that time. 1857, Muslims and Hindus and all fought together. But 90 years later, people separated. What happened? I think historical writing of putting, different religions as enemies instead of projecting the shared history is played a great role in it. So this is what's also happening at the world level. Whether it is in the case of what is happening in the United States, what is happening between the, war of civilization. So these kinds of discourse must be challenged philosophically, intellectually, culturally, and then we must present the story of human beings, whoever we are, whatever our religious or national affiliation, whether we are Muslims, Christians, Hindus, communists, we don't believe anything, we must recapture our human essence. This is the idea of religious humanism. This is the idea of interfaith literacy. This is the idea of cross-cultural literacy. This is what, the essence of our discourse should be today. So now, just to conclude with few things, what can we do to challenge such discourse? First of all, we must have independent non-political, non-partisan approach to history and culture. We must, instead of seeing cultures and civilizations as separate, watertight compartment, we must see the human story. For example, imagine in the West we have got great philosophical works, Greek philosophy. We cannot think about human philosophy without thinking of Indian philosophy or Arab philosophy. When we think about all that philosophy, all that 6 systems of Indian philosophy, starting from Sankhya to Vedanta to Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and all this philosophy, these philosophical systems are originally Indian, but we must also consider them as part of human heritage. The same way we must consider Greek philosophy as part of our human heritage. So instead of creating this Manichaean type of us versus them discourse, we must create a humanistic discourse. Secondly, we must have a realization that when knowledge is related to people or cultures, it's very difficult to be objective. Now, when I'm studying the West, I'm studying the West not like I'm studying mathematics or quantum physics. I'm studying an Indian. I'm studying it as an Indian. I'm studying it as an Indian who lived in the West for the past 20 years, more than 20 years, who have got experiences. So we must take account of the subjectivity and not take it as knowledge, accepted knowledge, as scientific proofs. And then we must have a more inclusive approach to religion and cultures. We cannot just, use religious bigoted fundamentalist discourse at one level. We cannot also, dismiss religion as, backward, because many people, actually 95% of the people of the world, they are all inspired by religion. And all this 95% of the people, they take religion as a very personal choice. Of course, you will find a group of minority misusing it, just like many of the great tragedies happened in 20th century. They were not religious people, they were secular ideologies. So we must account for a religious identity, but rooted in humanism. Then at personal level, we must also think that our identities are not watertight men. For example, one is an Indian. At the same time, one is from Kerala. At the same time, one is also from Malabar. At the same time, one is also Hindu. One is also Muslim. When we take all these identities together, and then when we harmonize it, it is only when that we can look at others with respect and love. It is only when that human existence is possible in a more harmonious way. As I said, these are some points which I just mentioned in passing. Obviously, we have got time for questions and answer, and I have given you just quickly the point, like the idea of clash of civilization, the difference between civil knowledge and political knowledge, and third, the question of common humanity, the question of fake news, the question of religious humanism, the question of, as I said, how people who are victorious, how people who win the battle, how they rewrite the history. So in the modern India, when we look at the history, it is always written ideologically. You have left way of approaching the history, you have the right way of approaching the history, but we must have an objective way of approaching history. Is it possible? So in other words, we must de-ideologize our approach to the history and put more humanistic tools into the rewriting of the history, and to see the story of India or the story of world as a story of composite cultures, each cultures participating in the reconstruction of a culture in a harmonious way. So these are the few points I mentioned. Obviously, Sabrina Lei, she is going to give a more theoretical approach. She's from the West, she's from Italy, but as I said, she spent studying Eastern culture. I think she's going to be presenting the topic in a more theoretical way. So I'm going to finish here. Obviously, we have more, a lot of questions to be asked when we discuss. And as I said, I'll be sending the notes in a week, 10 days from now. So thank you for listening. Before giving the mic to Sabrina Lei, I think organizer in India may have something to say. So thank you for your listening. Look forward to the question and answer. Of course, there is Sabrina Lei going to talk. So thank you. Hello? 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 Yes.
Hello, sir.
Okay.
Sir, what do you want, sir? Is it
Now, yes, my topic is my presentation is completed. Now, Sabrina Lei going to talk, or do you have something to make to comment?
1 minute, sir. After that, we have to start. Then thank you, sir, for your wonderful presentation. And as a part of this program, we need some kind of discussion. A lot of questions have shared through the chat box. Then one thing is that what is the main difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism?
Okay.
Then another question which is connected with religious humanism and ultra-secular humanism. Sir, you have to discuss about the different perspective of religious humanism and ultra-secular humanism. Then it is possible to religious humanism in during the period of this contemporary world. Then sir.
Can I ask you something? Instead of I answering the question now, let Sabrina Lei also present her point. I think 20 minutes.
Sir, after your presentation, madam.
Okay, she's going to present her program, her lecture now in 15-20 minutes. So after that we can take all the discussion. I think that seems to be good. Okay, Sabrina Lei is going to present in a very theoretical way, 15-20 minutes.
Okay, welcome.
Then we will take the question.
Okay, then.
Hi.
Madam.
Good morning.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you today. Thank you for the nice invitation. And now I will share with you briefly some points that from a pure theoretical point of view. So I will try to discuss and propose to you some reflection that are based on a pure theoretical and philosophical based discourse. So this means that this reflection and my discourse can be applicable at different situations. So it's not a discourse is come from an historical perspective or is an historical experience, but it's something that can be applied to different situations and different historical contexts. So my lecture, so that it will be about the multiculturalism and the theory of class of civilization. So actually the same topic that Dr. Laitif was discussing just now. But my approach is purely theoretical. So this means that we will start our reflection from the notion of multiculturalism. So we want to discuss want to start our discussion, our reflection from two main points. The first one is the meaning of the terms of the word multiculturalism, and the second issue is related to the impact of the meaning given to this word at different levels. So if we think about the meaning of the term multiculturalism, we can give this, we can say that with the word multiculturalism, usually is intended the presence of different and cultures in a space. The space can be geographical and political, so means national, and social. So what is at the first level, the multiculturalism means the presence of different groups who share a religion, who belong to an ethnicity, or profess also a political view, but who coexist in the same geographical space. So they can coexist in the same geographical space without creating a political entity. And this is the first level. The second level is related to the presence of different cultures, religions, ethnicity in a political unity. So it's a political unity. It means that we can speak about, for example, at the level of a nation. At the level of a nation, so we think about a political unity which is shared. So a political space can be shared by different culture, religions, and ethnicity. So each of them carry its own identity and its own history. And then at the third level, we speak about at social, the presence of multiculturalism at a social level. So as we see, these 3 points are related to each other, because if we see the first one, that one of the geographical one, is wider. The second one is more circumscript, because we think about a political entity, but the third one is still more rooted and related to the life of individuals. So what we want to investigate now is the impact or present impact of multiculturalism, that we can also speak now. We can say that with multiculturalism we speak about difference and differences or particularities in a political entity. So what is the impact of different cultures, ethnicities, and religions in a nation or in a society? This is what I like to investigate. So it is necessary that the differences among cultures, groups, or ethnicity will bring to a clash, because the clash is the way in which the history works. Actually, this is when we think about clash of civilization, we should not only think about the fact that the history and the fact that naturally civilization will clash. This is in our contemporary world, as Dr. Abdel Laitif discussed before. But the fact that is an inner nature of historical development, that civilization are in a mutual conflictual relation with each other, and this mutual conflictual relation will lead necessary to the historical development. But what we want to propose is a completely different discourse. So we want to investigate what is behind, what is the foundation of this discourse about the impossibility of different civilizations, of different groups and ethnicity, religion, and cultures, why they cannot create a unity. So as we said, all these differentiations, so they can be all of them reconduct to a general, a central issue that is widely debated in our time from different point of view and different perspective. This is also a discourse that has been usually developed at different levels and different also academical disciplines. So how is it possible and if it is possible for a multicultural society, multi-religious society, multi-ethnic society to exist, or if a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic society can reach a political unity. When I speak about political unity, I don't speak about a kind of democratic system in which there are different parties, and different parties, they propose actually different views about the way in which the country or the nation should be administrated, should be ruled. When I speak about political unity, I speak about if it's possible for differences to create a unity notwithstanding the differences. So can a multicultural society or multi-religious or multi-ethnic can be called a unified society? So is this possible to speak of at the same time of multiplicity, a unity at the political level? This is we should reflect on this point, and we should also reflect if when we deny this possibility, what is beyond, what is the foundation of the negation? If we answer to this possibility negatively, which is the impact, and actually what is the philosophical, anthropological, sociological discourse that is actually backing the negative answer to this possibility? So we should consider differences as an element of disturbance, or we should consider them as an element of progress, of dynamism, and we consider them also what moves history actually. What is the historical development, where, as we will see, always happens in a dialectics between identity and diversity. What is another question, that another issue that most of the time emerges in our contemporary world, especially, and I see in the East now, but in the West, this is a very long debate that it goes back to the religious war, so for several centuries ago. So the question is, the multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity, or multi-religious can put in danger the identity of a nation. So the identity of a nation can be put into danger, can be questioned by the presence of differences, of different culture or religion or ethnicity. This issue, this question, then will lead us to a deeper issue. That one is how we define identity. Is identity monolithical? And when we deny the presence of diversity in identity, when we say that all identities are monolithical, separated, and in mutual conflictual relation with each other, what we are actually saying and what is behind this approach. Then the second question is related to the historical identity or the historical development, as is a closed process or a monolithic process. So can identity by itself can actually justify the process or the development or the historical development? The answer to these two issues, to these two questions, will be in the negative. Now we just try to bring the discourse at a further theoretical level. So we don't speak anymore about multiculturalism, or we don't speak, we don't concentrate our attention to cultures, religions of ethnicity, because but we try to read all of them to collocate all this category in the notion of difference. And so I will start speaking about the relation between identity and difference, because very often that we employ, or in politics, or in media, or in the university, are employed, so use some terms without that these terms are studied or investigated, and sometimes we attribute a natural meaning to them, and we don't see what is the historical context in which this meaning has been attributed to this to the concept that we are actually using and sometimes this philosophical discourse, sociological discourse, has got a very huge impact on the life of the people. And I think the best way to start to clarify the issue is to see what is behind some the meaning and the use of some words. So we will see that identity has got a meaning only in relation with the difference. So identity and difference are two relational terms. Relational terms means that their meaning doesn't stand apart from each other, but they assume their meaning only if the two terms are in relation. And this is true for most of the concept of human language. So we cannot understand the notion of identity if we don't understand the notion of difference, because the identity and difference are involved in a dialogical and semantical relation, and they lose their meaning if they are separated. Their relation, but the nature of their relation at a philosophical, political, sociological level depends from something which is not only and mainly rational. But for example, when we speak about the identity of difference, this discourse is not only a rational discourse, but is the meaning that we attribute to the meaning and the value that we attribute to the identity and the difference is actually a political choice, and also is an ethical choice. So this means that the grammar, this is true actually not only at the level of the concept that we are discussing today, but also this has got a more general meaning. So this means that the grammar of the language, if we grammar of the language understood at a philosophical level, is always and first of all a ethical act before of being a political act or the fruits of a rational thinking. So this is a point that we should actually take it in consideration. So what does it mean an ethical act? An ethical act is an act which brings responsibility and freedom, and the responsibility and freedom is always at individual level. So we will see, we will be back to this consideration in the end of this pure reflection. So when we saw that what we are proposing actually is a paradigm in which identity and difference are complementary to each other. So they justify each other and make each other meaningful. Instead to choose a paradigm in which the relation is in mutual opposition. So when we think about difference in religious sense, in cultural or ethnical sense, we will actually start reflecting about the relation between universal and particular. So what is universal and what is particular? Actually, universal is the universality is only in the language. In the concept of human language, the universality is built, but at a human level, at a common level, we got only particular, because we got only individuals. So what does it mean? When identity is identified with the universal and the difference with the particular or the individual, the identity became the identity of a nation, of a group, or ethnicity, or whatever, became the historical foundation. So they became the identity as the historical foundation of a group, of a nation, of a civilization, while the particular, became historical and contingent. This is when we think about this, when we put identity and difference in a relation of opposition, and identity as universal and difference as particular, and the one is read and interpreted as the historical foundation, and the other one is said that is historical and particular, what is created in front of us are all the condition to build what we saw not only in our contemporary history, but this is actually could be we can find a different example in the history, but especially this happened in Europe, especially that we have a paradigm of historical evolution that can be defined as violent. This means that what is historical, what is particular, what is it belongs to the individual should be forcefully reconducted in the identity of the historical foundation, of the historical identity, in a necessary way. This means that what is particular, what is historical, doesn't have any rights to stand apart from the universal and the historical foundation of a nation or a civilization. This is actually very important because this issue has been discussed by a very important Western philosopher of the 20th century, that Karl Popper, who wrote the Open Society and Its Enemies. So he was when he wrote this book, he was actually, that now is a classic of the Western thoughts, but he was severely attacked because what he said that Western metaphysics, so the foundational discourse is intrinsically violent, and he attacked mainly Platonists for it, because for this reason of the existence of real existence belong only to the universal, real existence belong only to what is historical. So the monolithic historical identity is more truth. It carry with it more truth, more beings, more metaphysical value than what is particular and what is historical. So this according to the identitarian paradigm that is that we define as violent, the history of a civilization, of a nation, of a group reach the maximum level of development and in a specific time of history. After them became frozen. What is the identity of a nation, of a people, of a group became consolidate. So this means that all the particular, all the historical has been absorbed. There is what is the dialectical relation, which is what moves historical development, cease to exist, and a society, a nation, or a group, they start their decadence. They start their decadence because difference, what is individual, what is particular, what are so peculiar to each human being, each group, each religion, or each ethnicity, or an historical experience, became by definition a threat. Is not anymore what gives the meaning, gives the meaning to the notion of identity, which is a dynamic identity which is constantly into the historical development. But when the identity of a nation, civilization, of a group, human group, or a social group became a setup, and all the particulars are absorbed, what remain outside from this process, it became historical, so it cut off it not only cut off itself from any historical development, but actually disconnects completely from what every lively phenomenon happening among the people, or among the groups, or at religious, political, social level. This is a paradigm that can be applied not only in the conflict among ethnicity or religions or political party or whatever. This is a paradigm which is generally is the fundament of all these phenomena. What happened? So the difference became a threat. So this is something which is a threat to the stability, and a society starts refusing dialogue, became closed. There is absence of any kind of exchange, and at the end of all this this way of relating, actually there is a refuse of historical development. So a society which builds a dialogical violent relation is and became an historical society, an historical assume the tract of historicity, and start the process of decadence. So history is according to this paradigm, when you reach the peak, or to the supposed peak of a civilization, history is reinterpreted, rewritten, and reread according to this paradigm, and there is a point of view which is social, political, which lead necessarily to the clash. Because if we build the society or nation or the relation, everything according to this paradigm, the clash is inevitable. Actually, what seems to be necessary as inevitable can be actually reconduct to an ethical choice, which is an ethical choice, I said before, is a choice of freedom. It's a choice of responsibility that before being a collective choice is first of all and is an individual choice. The identity of a nation, of a group, of a human being also in his individuality is never monolithical, but is always is the fruit of a historical process of exchange, compromise, growth. So I just finished, just give this last point of reflection. We should start thinking about civilization not as with the paradigm of mechanicism, but we should start thinking about civilization with a paradigm which is of organic nature. Civilization as organism and not as mechanical, actually as a mechanism who once reach its best way of functioning doesn't need any external external intervention in order to ameliorate. No, a civilization like organism as the exchange, the compromise, the growth is always the result of interaction between identity and difference. Who gave to each other, only in a relation they can have, in their mutual relation, they became meaningful, not only at the level of philosophical grammar, but at the level of human existence and human civilization. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Your wonderful presentation.
Thank
Now
you.
it's the time for discussion. Excuse me.
Yes, we are here.
Hello, sir.
Okay.
So it's time for discussion. Now we have a lot of questions which is connected with this subject.
Okay.
One question which is connected with this one: what is the main difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism?
There is a question. What is the difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism? Can you repeat? Okay, just Sabrina is going to answer it. Okay.
What is the main difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism?
So actually, what is this is very important question, because multiculturalism means the presence of different cultures, religious ethnicity in a space, in a geographical space, but they cannot, they share a space, but they cannot create a unified society. This means that if we read the culture all in terms of different identities who cannot sorry, noise here.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Here.
Okay.
Okay, no, here. Okay, don't move it. So what we see is actually that if we read multiculturalism as different identities who stand apart from each other, but if they stand apart from each other in different geographical contexts, this means that not necessarily they will read to clash, not in the immediately, maybe but maybe in the long run it is separate. But when we speak about intraculturalism, this means a culture who already create a unified political entity. So they recognize themselves as part of unified political entity. And when I speak about political entity, I speak about not only in terms of a narrow point of view of politics, but politically in the way in which the Greek give the meaning given by Greeks to this word political from polis. This means that the context in which human beings grow and develop their skill and actually improve their humanity. So political unity in this sense. This is different cultures, different who bring with them different peculiarities. All of them, notwithstanding differences, notwithstanding multiplicity, they create an identity. So while in the multiculturalism we have got different entities, and each who look at each other as mutual opponents. In the multiculturalism, in the intercultural perspective, we see different cultures which have been able to build a unity which does not delete the differences, but in which differences and peculiarities became the point of strength of a society and the inner full of movement, historical movement and social and political development.
Okay, sir. Other question is that you have to talk about religious humanism and ultra-secular humanism.
Okay, that's what. So we can do like this now. We have got number of questions, and also people can also let us do now like a type of conversation. So obviously, you can also questions and answer, and people can also talk there. So when it comes to religious humanism, can you repeat the question again, please?
Can it is possible to that contemporary world?
Okay. Religious, the words to can you repeat the question again, please?
Then you have to talk about religious humanism and ultra-secular humanism.
Okay, that's understand.
Yes,
so
yes.
When we talk about religious humanism, let me read a very small paragraph, which defines what is religious humanism. Of course, in our thinking, there is something called religious humanism that seeks to protect human autonomy. The main purpose of religious humanism is it seeks to protect human autonomy beyond all religious confines. Human autonomy means human freedom, the choices human beings made. And human autonomy, human freedom, and dignity. This is the essence of religious humanism. It's an open, innovative, and constructive reading of the religious sources. What happens in a religious humanism? Of course, subjectively, you might be a Muslim or a Hindu or a Christian or a Jew. You respect your religion, you follow your religion, but at the same time, you see beyond that religious identity, there is a human identity. There, just as you are a Muslim, just as you are a Hindu or a Jew or a Christian, you must appreciate the choices made by other people in terms of their religious choices. And secondly, you also must have an open approach to religion when you read the religious text. It doesn't mean that I read a Quran against the fundamental principles of the Quran, or I read Bhagavad Gita or any other religious text against the principles of Gita. I read an inclusive reading of Gita. I read an inclusive reading of the Quran to account for the human complexities. So this is the religious humanism. And more importantly, as the Quran says, like Rafidin, there is no compulsion. We have to accept people. All religions says, like for example, Quran says that if God wanted, Allah wanted, He could have made you all in one religion. No, we are different religions. So we must. This is the religious humanism. When it comes to radical secularism, the point of radical secularism is that radical secularism and religious fundamentalism, both of them feed each other. Religious fundamentalism, I'm using a word fundamentalism without any other word. Religious fundamentalism sees religious identity as the only human identity. Not only religious identity, if I'm Muslim, if one is a Muslim religious fundamentalist or any other fundamentalist, he or she does not recognize the presence of other religion. all his worldview is exclusively, defined by a selective interpretation of his own religion. This is what exactly radical secularism. What is radical secularism saying? Radical secularism completely wants to cancel any form of religious presence in the society in terms of the choices they made. For example, for radical secularists, maybe a Hindu priest wearing his clothes might not be acceptable, or a Muslim woman wearing her hijab may not be acceptable, because for radical secularism, religion itself is outdated. So we have to find the way. This is the difference. I hope I clarified. Of course, these are just ideas,
Another question which is connected with the present scenario, sir. Hello, sir. Another question which is connected with the present scenario. How relevant is the idea of clash of civilization in the present COVID era?
Okay. Yes.
Now we have to talk about the clash of civilization. What is the relevance of this concept of clash of civilization in the post-COVID era?
The idea is that, the problem is that, our problem is that everything comes from the West, we accept it. For me, I am between West and East. My wife is from the heart of the West. I've been living in the West for the last 20 years. For me, personally, as a public intellectual, everything which is good in, whether it is a Hindu culture or Muslim culture or Western culture, I accept it. But of course, I have got my religious, identity, praying, fasting, adhering to, that is my personal identity. So unfortunately, the problem is that many people in many parts of the world, whether it is in India, whether it is in our neighbor country, in South Asia, or even Sri Lanka, people accept this concept. When they define that, okay, like British did, actually class of civilization is an extension of the divide and rule policy of the British. How did they divide India? Maybe some of you might ask questions about how did this idea of Hindu versus Muslim or this Manichaean differences came, because they divided. They saw, for example, now you tell, I'm sure some of you who are historians know Tarajan's historical discourse. Tarajan is a great historian, an Indian historian. He was not a Muslim, he was a Hindu, but he knew Persian. He had resources too. He had the knowledge of Persian sources. He wrote Indian history. He wrote a very wonderful book called Influence of Islam on Indian Culture. He presents a very inclusive approach. He even says, when we look at Shivaji and Maratha, there were Muslims fighting with Shivaji, the Maratha leader. There were Muslim leaders fighting with him in his military. So we cannot imagine now. Now, for example, in the Mughal, most of the Mughal, Mughal generals, Mughal bureaucracy, members of the bureaucracy, they were Hindus. So, but clash of civilization has been reprojected. Now, unfortunately, what is happening? The gentleman in the White House, he is in fact reenacting the clash of civilization. So it is very, very much relevant, though it is actually bankrupt. It's a bankrupt philosophy, but lot of forces. It is not religion. For example, when it comes to problem of common Hindus, common Muslims, they all suffer. But when it comes to politics, as she was saying that, the problem is that instead of seeing differences and opportunities for diversity, differences cannot be tolerated. So clash of civilization, though it is very much bankrupt, unfortunately it is coming up. Like when he called the Chinese virus, when he called the man in White House, when he called the Chinese virus, so the telling in front of a Chinese American reporter of Chinese origin was nothing to do with China. So it is unfortunately, though it is philosophically bankrupt. For example, we cannot think about an India, we cannot think about a West without connection with other civilization. So unfortunately, it is relevant. but it is our duty to challenge it through a discourse of inclusiveness.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you. Now this time is over.
Okay.
Now we are going to conclude our session.
Okay, just want to, 1 minute please, just wanted to hear from you, some of you, I think few minutes telling, was it useful, was the program clear, was it expected of that? Just do you want to have some sort of summarization from any of you?
Okay, sir. Okay, just 1 minute.
Okay. Any other question or anything?
Sir, is there any questions from our participants?
A very good session. Yes.
Yeah, they wrote message in the chat. Now
okay.
you can read it.
Yeah. So do you want to just, okay, for us, it's your timing. We don't want to take your time. Do you want to make some concluding comments, any of you, about all this discussion, and just then obviously we can and thank you very much for all your patience and all hearing. You know that we have got, Sabrina spoke a lot of things. Sabrina is a philosopher. She speaks a lot of things. You have to rethink about it. She will write it and send it. We will write it and send it. So obviously we have got this time limitation. We are 3 hours behind you, 3 hours and 30 minutes. So I just want to hear from you an overall summarization. Then we can say goodbye for Tanvi.
Hello, sir. Padmanabhan, sir. Hello, Padmanabhan, sir. Hello, Padmanabhan.
Yes, Mr. Padmanabhan. Yes.
Hello, Padmanabhan, sir. Hello, Padmanabhan, sir. Sir, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello, Padmanabhan.
Yes, we can. Yes,
we can hear.
Padmanabhan, sir. Hello, Padmanabhan, sir.
Mr. Padmanabhan has to unmute.
Unmute. Please unmute, sir. Please unmute, sir. Sorry, network. Hello, Padmanabhan, sir.
Yes, I am asking unmute.
Yes.
Please unmute.
Yes.
Let him unmute, or anybody. Just
hello, sir. Is any questions, sir? Please.
Okay.
1 minute, sir. Please wait.
Okay, I think he has to unmute, or anybody, Dr. Srividya, or you see a lot of people there.
Dr. Srividya, madam.
Padmanabhan, Mr. Padmanabhan unmuted.
Hello, Padmanabhan, sir. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Padmanabhan, sir.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Please.
Hello.
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 Hello, Padmanabhan, sir. Is it clear?
Hello. Okay, I am hearing.
Sir, please ask one question which is connected with our discussion.
Oh, somebody is asking, just a minute, somebody is asking me about me, where I am from Kerala. I'm actually from Kerala, from near Talcheri. I did this personal question, somebody asked, I just want to reply before Mr. Padmanabhan asking questions or commenting. I did my part of my studies in Talcheri Brahman College, then LLB from Calicut Law College, LLM from Aligarh, and then LLM from Aligarh, then MPhil from UK, and then PhD I work on Edward Said. So I've been living in the West, and I'm specializing in medieval philosophy, classic Islamic law, Hindu philosophy, and also history. So this is, and one of my classmates in Calicut Law College is an alumni of Sir Syed College, Justice Soman. He is the district judge in Calicut, I think. And I see most of the posts about Sir Syed College when he posts. So we have got that connection. And I visited Sir Syed College in 80s. Yes.
Thank you,
just a long answer for a short question. And Sabrina is from Rome, so she was doing PhD, then we met. So Madhurami has published an interview before 2 weeks ago in the Sunday. So in Varandya Padip, more information.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Sir, Padmanabhan sir.
Yes, someone I want to ask Malayalam ഭാഷയിൽ പിന്നെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ചോദിക്കോ മലയാള ഭാഷയിൽ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും
മലയാളത്തിൽ ചോദിക്കാമെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു.
ചോദിക്കാവുന്നതാണ്.
ബിജു, Biju, please ask certain question.
Okay, Biju. നിങ്ങൾ unmute Biju. Mr. Biju. Okay.
Hello, sir. I want to ask one question. Sir, in the time of Cold War, actually, there is a ideological clash happened between the capitalist group and the communist group.
Yes.
But sir, discussed about the cultural clash, civilization clash. So, can you explain, please, about the civilization clash? How it happened? The civilization clashes in the time of the Cold War.
Okay, maybe Sabrina can explain very briefly.
In the Cold War or generally?
No, cultural clash. What is the meaning of cultural clash? Briefly, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Sabrina will explain it very briefly.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So, thank you. Yes, briefly. So actually, what happened? When is every clash happened when usually there is a society reach the peak, and or a civilization of a nation, they reach a peak of development, and after this peak of development, they close themselves, and they think that they to have reached the ultimate level of their cultural, political possibilities. So it starts that from an attitude which is towards the world, towards the with dynamic, towards the external, they became inward. So they close themselves, and when a nation, a society close. It became close, that it's nature that they start feel is a kind of psychological reaction. We can also think about we can also read it in this way. So they cannot stand difference. They cannot stand any kind of everything comes in front of them which is not known to them, which has not been previously assimilated. That became in a way an enemy or a threat. And when this attitude is doesn't belong only to one nation, but is shared by different civilizations who are reached in a way the peak of decadence, and the peak of, because the decadence of a nation bring with them issues. But when these issues they are trying to cope with issues, creating an outside enemy. So this is a much way of protest. It's a kind of way of reaction. When a civilization is in the decadence, they want to protect themselves from any external influence, but at the same time they want to protect the status quo, even notwithstanding the difficulties they are facing in their own society. So when started the clash of civilization, the one who started the clash is always the one which is internally suffering, which is internally unbalanced. When a civilization became close, but at the same time start developing an imbalance, internal imbalance, what they develop an aggressive attitude towards everything which is external, and which is recognized not as a potential partner of a dialogue or a potential collaboration, but is can be understood only as an enemy. Because if reading the other as an enemy will strengthen their losing their internal identity, which is already losing its structure and its balance.
Very briefly, what Sabrina was saying, that when Cold War ended, Western capitalism thought that this is the triumph. So then
Yes,
it wants it wants a new enemy, and look at here and there. Then they saw the medieval Islamic threat. So this is the idea of clash of civilization. But interestingly, when these people in America, Samuel Huntington and others, spoke about clash of civilization, they were even exclusive of Latin Americans or Spanish people in United States, black people in United States. Even among themselves, there is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Catholics were excluded for a long time in the American discourse. Jews were excluded, but they had to accept it after the Second World War. So it's a way of finding a new enemy. But interestingly, we sometimes take that. For example, when you think of India, what is Bhakti movement in India? All this Bhakti movement came through a deep interaction with Islam, deep interaction with the local, culture. Some of the, for example, there is this, in Germany and England in 18 and 17th century, there is a rediscovery of Sanskrit literature. It came through a translation of Upanishads made by Darashuko in Persian, and then some European scholars translated that from Persian to German to French. It is true that it came out. What I mean to say is that when we look at each other, not as enemies, but as occupying the same planet, same country, it is in the interest of all people. So inclusivism, of course, not at the cost of one's individual identity, but respecting one's religious faith, whether you are a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu or a communist, respecting each other, then reaching out humanity. This idea of dialogue of civilizations. And secondly, some people asked our details and email address. Please contact Dr. Shafi or our organizer. They have got our email address. So the best way is to email us, anyone. So you can contact Dr. Shafi or people who organize this thing, and they have got our email address. The best way is email address.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
One question. Swarna Suresh.
Okay, please, Swarna Suresh. Yes, yes. മലയാളത്തിലും ചോദ്യം ചോദിക്കാം കേട്ടോ. ഞാൻ മാതൃഭൂമി വായിച്ചിട്ട് വളർന്ന.
Hello, sir.
Okay, yes, Swarna.
Actually, my question here is, what I understood was culturalism is being more associated with religion. There are people like atheists, they don't actually consider them, associating to any religion. So how is their idea of culture differ from the cultural religious culturalism?
Okay. Look, I think nobody can exclude anybody. Even an atheist, religious people in their dialogue, they should not exclude atheists. And neither, atheist, I remember, I studied the atheism, rationalist movement in Kerala in 1970s. We had the rationalist movement of Dr. A.T. Kovur, then, P.C. Kadalundi and all. They were atheists, but they had an inclusive dialogue. When they talked to religious people, of course, they were challenging, superstition, but they never saw religious people as enemies. So militant atheism, militant religious fundamentalism, both feed each other. Number one. Number two, religion is one part of human culture. Religion is not the sole part of human culture. Religion is one of the major parts. Take India. I've been studying India. Go to Vedas, some of the mantras. The same thing is repeated 4,000, 5,000 years after. There is, for example, all these religious ceremonies, all these yagas, all this, of course, it has got some problem, caste system. That is another question. But there are also a lot of people who take it as a very humanistic way. Gandhi was a Hindu, and Rajaram Mohan Rai was a Hindu, and you can also fundamentalist. So we cannot exclude religious, we cannot exclude atheists. For example, one of the most important Indian philosophies, Sankhya philosophy, is atheist philosophy. So, so the thing is that we have to give and take. We should not have absolutist discourse. This is an issue. So one of the problem I have with current religious fundamentalist discourse current atheist discourse is that they are maximalist. They have this meta narrative. They say that anybody who is religious, by the fact that he or she is religious, he must be reactionary. So no, we have to find a way, adopt each other. So I think when religious people, they have discourse, they should also have discourse with atheist people. There should be discourse between secularism and religious approach. So this is the way. We have to, at times we have to be in the shoe of other people. Think they are human beings, we are human beings. No, why don't we talk? What prevents from my talk? I think important thing is to have an inclusive approach. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Sorna. Okay. Sabrina will speak. ഞാൻ മലയാളത്തിൽ വളരെ ചെറുതായിട്ട് പറയാം. അതായത് വളരെ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. Sabrina will laugh. Sabrina always have problem in understanding Malayalam. അതായത് Sabrina knows all that O.V. Vijayan, M. Mukundan and all. But when it comes to talking, she said like this. No. So that's another. നമ്മൾ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും സർസെയ്ദ് കോളേജ് ആയിട്ടും കേരളത്തിലെ അക്കാഡമിക് ആയിട്ടും നമ്മൾ സഹകരിക്കും. അതായത് നമ്മൾക്ക് ഈ ഇന്ത്യൻ ഹിസ്റ്ററിന്റെ ഒരു ഡി ഐഡിയോളജിസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു അവസ്ഥ ഇന്ത്യൻ ഹിസ്റ്ററി ഉണ്ടാണോ? അതായത് ഒരു ഹ്യൂമനിസ്റ്റിക് അപ്രോച്ച്, ഇൻക്ലൂസീവ് അപ്രോച്ച്. മലയാളത്തിൽ ഇപ്പൊ ഉദാഹരണത്തിന് കേരളത്തിലെ മലബാറിന്റെ ചരിത്രം പഠിക്കുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ എപ്പോഴും എന്താ പറയാ, ഈ വില്യം ലോഗന്റെ മലബാർ മാനുവലും അവർ ചെയ്ത ചരിത്രത്തിലൂടെയാണ് പഠിക്കുന്നത്. അത് നമ്മൾ ഹൗ ടു റീഡ് ഇൻ ബിറ്റ്വീൻ. തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും അസ് വേഴ്സസ് ദം എന്ന രീതിയിലാണ് അവർ എഴുതിയത്. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെയുള്ള കുറെ ഡോക്യുമെന്റ്സ്, കാര്യങ്ങൾ, ഹിസ്റ്ററി, കൾച്ചർ, ഫിലോസഫി, ആന്ത്രോപോളജി ഒക്കെ നമുക്ക് സഹകരിക്കാം. പിന്നെ നമ്മൾ ഈ വർഷം അവസാനം നമ്മൾ തവാസുൽ സെന്റർ ഓൾറെഡി നമ്മളൊരു റിസർച്ച് മാഗസിൻ പ്രസിദ്ധീകരിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്, ലാംഗ്വേജ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട്. നമ്മൾ ഈ അവസാനം വി ആർ ഗോയിങ് ടു പബ്ലിഷ് എ ജേർണൽ, ജേർണൽ ഓഫ് റിലീജിയൻ ആൻഡ് ഫിലോസഫി. അതിലൊക്കെ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ആൾക്കാർക്ക് എഴുതാൻ പറ്റുന്നതാണ്. പിന്നെ നമുക്ക് we can talk. Maybe we can also do a separate session on writing of Indian history. What happened to the British time? How did British rewriting of Indian history still continues to influence our contemporary world, contemporary Indian situation? നമുക്ക് we can ചെയ്യാം. വളരെ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. ഒരിക്കൽ കൂടി നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും, all of you, our thanks, and the principal, the people who organized, and also apologize the Arabic department. They have to wait for a few minutes to finish this thing. Anyone who wants to contact us, as I said, the address is there. Email address is the best email address. Best way to contact, please email us. Sabrina wants to say just quickly. Yeah, finish.
Yes. So thank you very much for hosting. I don't want to take much more of your time. Thank you very much again. It's been very inspiring. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice afternoon. And Dr. Shafi, you can later contact me through WhatsApp. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Biju.
Oh, yes.
Thank you all. Bye bye.
Vote of thanks. Please
Thank
wait.
you. Okay. Vote of thanks. Okay.
Yes.
Almost.
I'm Haidar Ali, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Syed College. Thank you, sir, for having a wonderful presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation, Multiculturalism and Interfaith Literacy, challenging the idea of clash of civilization. Let me express my sincere thanks to Dr. Abdel Laitif and Dr. Sabrina Lei for accepting our request for a webinar and also a fantabulous presentation. I also express my gratitude towards our beloved principal, Lieutenant Dr. Ashraf Varapalli, and I express my sincere gratitude towards college IQAC coordinator Dr. Nafisa Baby and Doctrina coordinator Dr. Abdul Salam Ake and our department HOD Dr. Shafi AE for the great effort for conducting such a grand program. And I also thanked all the participants who coming from different parts of the world. And thank you once again, all of you. Thank you.